Welcome, everybody. This is week 2 of our 4-week seminar on the science and politics of COVID vaccination. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really happy to see so many faces in the Zoom chat today. It's nothing like being in person, but I'm super happy to see it. Today, we'll be hearing from Andrew and Crystal on the science and public health frameworks of vaccination. And I'm going to close us off with some headlines and mention some politics of COVID as we head into 2021. And as we go into it, I want to give a special thanks to Raymond Barglow for helping us put this all together. You've been a huge help with mentoring and coordination, so thank you, Raymond. And for everybody, just so you know, our first session is now on YouTube. So if you missed last week, feel free to check out the recording. Crystal, Andrew, feel free to drop the recording in the chat if you have the link available, and people can feel free to check that out and catch up if you haven't seen it yet. And with that, I'll hand it off to Andrew, who was our first speaker.
Cool. Thanks, Dean. We got a ton of great questions last week, and we answered a bunch of them. That document is not on our website yet, but will be very soon. So there were a bunch of great questions. Check out that document for some answers, and we're going to keep working on that document as more people ask questions. And if there are things that aren't clear, just comment. Anyone can comment on that document. Let us know. I wanted to address a few questions that I thought were important and that several people had. Okay, so I first wanted to talk about the ingredients of the vaccines. And I know this is of interest to some people and less interesting to other people, so I'll go through pretty quickly. But if you have any questions, just let me know, and I'm happy to do a little bit more research. I'll admit I'm not a chemist, so this is what I could find on my own, but at least it'll get us started. And if people have more questions, we can go on from there.
Hey, Andrew, if you can't let people in, do you want to make me host again?
Oh, yes, yes. Okay, you should be host. Oh, wait. Now you should be host. Cool. All right. Cool. So let's start with the Moderna vaccine ingredients. The most important ingredient, obviously, is the mRNA. This is what gets translated into the spike protein, causes this rapid immune response that gives you a long-lasting immunity to COVID-19. So mRNA is in every cell in your body, and it is also rapidly broken down. So this seems to pose no real risk. The next biggest part of the vaccine are all the lipids. There's a lot of lipids. There's 4 different types of lipids in this. Lipids are just fats. And I wanted to make sure folks understood why lipids are so important to the vaccine. If you looked at the vaccine under a really powerful microscope, what you would see are actually these lipid nanoparticles. They're tiny droplets of lipids, which are just fats, like I said. And inside each of these lipid nanoparticles is the mRNA. That's where it's held. And these lipids protect the mRNA until it can get into your cells. So one of these lipids is called SM-102. It's a relatively new chemical. It was developed in 2018, and it's developed for mRNA therapies that are meant to be given for a long amount of time, maybe weekly injections. So it's designed for chronic use, chronic exposure, but we don't know that much about it. And as you can see, those are sort of these would be, the SM-102 would be over here, like one of these ionizable lipids. And so they're sort of in the middle of the vaccine. The next are these DMG PEG 2000 lipids over here. And this is what's known as a pegylated lipid. And I apologize for the terminology here. PEG is short for polyethylene glycol. And this has been added to a lot of medical products. And it's used to basically improve their efficacy. And particularly in the COVID-19 vaccine, they stabilize the vaccine while it makes its way to your cells. Now, the reason I bring this up in particular is because pegylated lipids have some anaphylaxis concerns. Anaphylaxis is a severe allergic reaction that some people experience when they get the vaccine. It's a very small number of people, something like 1 in 100,000, I think Crystal is going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, but it is something to be aware of, that some people have a bad reaction to pegylated lipids. And we don't really know why. The next one is, but before I go on, the pegylated lipids are really important. They are this purple thing, this purple lipid, and they coat the outside of the vaccine so that it stays together while it's getting to your cell. The other ones, there's cholesterol, which is in all of our bodies, we're constantly making, and there's a lipid called DSPC. This is a common component of all cell membranes in our body. And like I said, these lipids are, some of them are a little unknown to me, but I want to make the point that our body is really good at breaking down lipids. We have a huge number of metabolic pathways that are known as fatty acid oxidation pathways that are used to break down lipids. We can break down short chain, medium chain, long chain, very long chain lipids. Because lipids are such an important part of our diet and an important part of our body, we are really good at breaking them down. So the concerns that these lipids would be lasting in our body for very long, I think are not founded. And for me, I think pose very low risk. The next ingredients are acetic acid. This is used in a component of vinegar. There's also something called tromethamine. This is used to treat a condition called metabolic acidosis, which is having too much blood or too much acid in the blood. It's used also in various drugs for inflammation. And it's been used safely for decades in different medicines. It seems to pose no risk that we know of. Next is a type of salt called sodium acetate. This isn't regular table salt, but it is used in a lot of food. For example, a lot of salt and vinegar potato chips have sodium acetate in them. It seems to be safe. And then lastly, there's sucrose. This is just common table sugar, comes from sugar cane and other plants. This is everything that's in the Moderna vaccine. You can find this information online too, if you want to do more research, but I wanted to give folks a sense for what's really in the vaccine, and that it's not really as scary, I think, as you might first think. And then the Pfizer vaccine is really very similar. There are also 4 different types of lipids. The names have changed for 2 of them, but they are basically play the same role. You'll see this ALC0159. This is another pegylated lipid. It plays a very similar role to the pegylated lipid in the Moderna vaccine. And then there's the ALC0315. This is similar to what was called SM102 in the Moderna vaccine. It's a relatively new chemical, and it's made for mRNA therapies like this and designed for chronic exposure. There's, of course, also cholesterol and DSPC, which are already in our body, seem to be safe. The salts in the Pfizer vaccine, there's more of them because there's no acids. And so this sort of makes up for it. There's potassium chloride. This is a potassium supplement or also a salt replacement for people on low sodium diets. Has been safely consumed for decades. There's monobasic potassium phosphate. This is used in like Gatorade and Powerade to restore electrolytes. So seems to be safe. There's sodium chloride, that's just regular old table salt. And then there's something called dibasic sodium phosphate dihydrate. This has been used for many decades for thickening, things like pudding, like Jello pudding. It's also been used as a laxative. Seems to have a safe history of use in medicine. And then there's also sucrose in the Pfizer vaccine. And that's everything in the Pfizer vaccine.
Cool.
Okay, and then one more thing I wanted to mention, that some folks had questions about how long the vaccine lasts in the body. And I just wanted to reiterate a really important point, that the mRNA vaccine is translated into protein to the right here. It creates this spike protein and does not last in the body. It is not turned into DNA. There are retroviruses such as HIV that can integrate into your DNA, but they have really particular machinery to do that. And COVID-19 does not have that machinery. The vaccine does not have that machinery. So it's not going to happen. And it's also, I think, really important to understand that mRNA is rapidly broken down by your body. About 50% of the mRNA after you get the shot is gone in 5 hours. And more than 90% of that is gone within 24 hours. So that's pretty rapidly getting broken down. It's actually the protein that is made from that mRNA, the spike protein, which is going to last on the order of days or weeks and give you that strong response. I just wanted to clarify that because I know people had questions. And that's everything.
Cool. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I just had a few questions that I wanted to address too. They're all linked, they're all written about in that document. Actually, a few people were let in, so maybe we can share that document again for the people who just got into our discussion here. And Andrew, can you make the presentation, my presentation Zoom host?
Oh, okay.
But while he's doing that, there's the question of why are you still infectious after you get vaccinated? You can still get the virus and then you can still transmit it. The vaccine doesn't make you transmit the virus, but you can still pick it up and from other places and then shed it to other people. And that's because the vaccine may not provide a whole lot of mucosal antibody, so you could still get infected in your nasal passages, your mouth, those mucosal membranes that don't have the high amounts of IgA antibody, and you can still spread it to others. We are seeing that maybe the shedding is less in vaccinated people, but we don't know exact numbers, and we want to keep everybody safe. So you should still wear a mask even after being vaccinated. So yeah, today I am going to talk about the concept of One Health and how human, other species, plants, animals, we're all interconnected. And so right now in medicine and veterinary medicine and vet school, I learned about the concept of One Health and how for too long we've been all acting in our own silos, ignoring what the other professions were doing. Veterinarians were kind of ignoring human doctors. People who are studying public health weren't well connected with medical doctors, veterinarians. So we all need to kind of work together in a transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary collaboration in order to generate new ideas and strategies to address the complex global health challenges that we face. And COVID-19 is a prime example of that. So as humans have gained dominance over our biosphere and converted our ecosystems during our century of industrialization and urbanization and globalization, we have become increasingly vulnerable to emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases. I really like this graphic because it tells all about how everything is kind of connected. We have to consider these issues of gender, community, equity, ethics, policy, legislation, governance, investment, and finance in order to take into account all of the things that lead to a healthy people and planet. The CDC reports that 75% of emerging pathogens are transmitted from animals to humans. Just as SARS-CoV-2 is a zoonotic disease that came from our interactions with animals, as do these other diseases that will pop up. So industrialized factory farming has resulted in thousands of genetically similar animals housed in close proximity, which creates the perfect environment for producing viral mutations that can potentially jump from one species to another. So in order to ensure the health and continued existence of our planet, consideration must be given to this complex interconnectedness and the independence of all living species and the environment. And that is the concept of One Health. This is a great graphic that shows how humans have dramatically increased the numbers of other species on this planet for our own use. This is based on data from the 2018 report published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And they found that while the world's humans comprise just 0.01% of all living things, human consumption patterns have caused the loss of 83% of all wild animals and half of all plant species, while livestock numbers have soared, and this is the result of industrialized factory farming. Today, farmed poultry makes up 70% of all the birds on the planet, and only 30% of those are wild birds now. And 60% of all mammals on Earth are livestock, mostly cattle and pigs, and 36% of the remaining are human, while only 4% are wild animals. So one might ask, well, are we creating substantially more animals on Earth than we used to? Yes, I mean, here is the number of domesticated animals compared to the number of wild animals that currently exist. We have 20 billion chickens on this planet right now, 1.5 billion cows, only 900,000 American water buffalo. We have, what was this? I forget, oops, sorry, lost my thing. So yeah, these are just interesting statistics. We also added, I added how we have 677 million pigs and 100 million animals raised for fur. This is a graph showing the dramatic increase in the number of chickens we are creating over time. This graph is from 1890 to 2014. You have thousands of genetically similar animals packed into these warehouses. There's already potentially deadly strains of bird and swine flu with pandemic potentially circulating in these factory farms today. H5N1, which unfortunately doesn't easily transmit to humans yet, has a 60% mortality rate in humans. There are currently a lot of highly pathogenic avian influenza viruses circulating the globe today in many different countries. I'll talk about how you can yourself look up these disease outbreaks. This is, if you take out chickens, then our next species that we are growing in significant numbers are pigs. And pigs play a crucial role in spreading influenza virus, as I will share later. Influenza virus is will likely be our next pandemic, just as it did in history. We had the 1918 Spanish flu, which killed 20 to 50 million people. The Asian flu in 1957 killed 700 million people. The Hong Kong flu of 1968 killed 500 million people. In 2009, we had the swine flu, which killed about 300,000 people. And then 2003, we started to have our coronaviruses. That was SARS, and then MERS, and now SARS-CoV-2. And this is just a graph of how, or just a diagram of the different coronaviruses. And we can see bats here are the main reservoir. I'm gonna go to the next slide here. Bats are our reservoir because they're a very interesting species because they have such high metabolic demands for flight. They have developed these really cool anti-inflammatory responses in their bodies, which makes them really good at carrying a lot of viruses, but not getting sick by them. We've heard from, I don't know if you've heard of SARS-CoV-2, that cytokine storm, that inflammation that leads to a lot of the problems later on. And bats are kind of immune to that in a way and can carry a lot of viruses in their bodies. Now we have humans. You see how humans get these different coronaviruses from the intermediate hosts. We thought maybe SARS-CoV-2 came from the pangolin. That's changing. We might consider other species, which I'll talk about next. MERS came from the camels, and then the original SARS-CoV-1 came from the palm. So let's talk about mink now. Mink could actually be an intermediate host for SARS-CoV-2. In Denmark, there was an outbreak on a mink farm. Ultimately, that led to 17 million mink being slaughtered. In the US, we had outbreaks in Oregon, Utah, Wisconsin, and Michigan. 15,000 mink succumbing to the virus. And this particular study focused on the first 16 farms that experienced an outbreak in the Netherlands. The first occurred in April 23rd, 2020, when 4 of the 5 farm workers developed respiratory symptoms. Coronavirus was subsequently isolated from the minks, and on the second farm that was investigated, the outbreak was confirmed on the 25th, and 8 employees were tested 5 days later. On April 30th, they all had antibodies for SARS-CoV-2 in their serum. 68% of the employees on mink farms caught COVID-19. Antibodies were identified in 51% of the cases, and PCR tests were positive in the remaining 49. So mink are in these giant factory farms, and they're crammed into small cages. They can't socially distance or wear masks. So because of so much of this virus is jumping around, and new variants are popping up in these factory farms, you have a lot of, just like I said, genetically similar animals. This allows the virus to circulate, mutate, and it leads to the production of these new variants. One quote from the article was that among the animal species that are susceptible to natural SARS-CoV-2 infection, farmed mink pose a considerable threat to public health. And this study in particular showed that there was a lot of diversity in the sequences, which meant that there was prolonged circulation of the virus among the mink, which might have led to accumulation of mutations that increased the virulence of the virus. There was also a study showing that new variants might not be detected by the 4 commercially available monoclonal antibodies used to treat COVID-19. They also believe that workers can get it from just simply inhaling dust that contains the feces and other things from the farms. And these are the little mink. They're also found to be escaping from cages in these quarantine facilities. Lori Ann Bird, who is the environmental health director at the Center for Biological Diversity, says that with COVID-19 infected mink continuing to escape from these quarantine COVID infected facilities, it's obvious that this industry poses far too great a threat to wildlife and public health to allow it to continue to operate as it is. So hopefully this might lead to the end of the mink industry, but who knows, we will see. And then I wanted to talk briefly about our next pandemic, which could be from an influenza virus. These are the species that were likely to cause those previous pandemics that I talked about in the 1918 Spanish flu. Came from either a bird or a pig, we're not sure. The avian flu, bird, obviously, Hong Kong flu, bird. And then the 2009 swine flu came from a pig. And I just want to talk about how that was. We have the basic structure of the flu virus. Influenza is coded in with surface proteins that are H and N. This is where like the H and the N of how we name these influenza viruses comes from. And then you have these 8 segments of RNA that live inside of this influenza virus. And these RNA strands can easily switch up and mutate, and we'll show you how that happens. You have influenza A you have like birds and pigs and humans, and they all kind of share these similar receptors, these alpha-2/3 linked receptors. Influenza A viruses that typically infect and transmit in one animal species can sometimes cross over and cause illness in another species. And until 1998, only H1N1 viruses circulated widely in the US pig population. But in 1998, H3N2 viruses from humans were introduced into the pig population and caused widespread disease among pigs. More recently, H3N8 viruses from horses have crossed over and caused outbreaks in dogs. And avian influenza A viruses may be transmitted from animals to humans in two ways, either directly from birds or from an avian influenza virus contaminated environments to people, or through an intermediate host such as a pig. And here's more detail on how that these things happen. I won't go into much more detail than that because I think it would bore you, but I'm happy to talk about it more. If you want to ask in the chat, we can share this in the future and I can give you the exact pathways for how these viruses mutate and can lead to pandemics. And I wanted to share with you this website, this graphic. And then this website is great for keeping up to date on emerging diseases worldwide. I definitely recommend you check it out and you can sign up for alerts. I got the first alerts about this SARS-CoV-2 virus way back in 2019. So thank you very much. I think I'm passing it off to Andrew.
So we covered this a little bit last week, but I think it's worth talking about in like good detail. How do we know if a vaccine works? And when we ask a question like this, there's really two separate questions. The first is one of efficacy. Like, does the vaccine prevent COVID-19, and how well does it do that? Can we assign some sort of numerical value? And the second question is one of safety. What are the side effects of this vaccine? And how severe are they? And both of these questions are critical, right? Like, you wouldn't want a vaccine that doesn't work, no matter how little side effects there are. And you also wouldn't want a vaccine where the side effects are worse than getting COVID-19. Right? So these are both important. And so how do we assess these things? Do we just give the vaccine to a bunch of people? No, not exactly. There is a system. And I'm going to describe the FDA's system for getting a vaccine approved. So this is true in the US, maybe different in other countries. So before any vaccines go in humans, the company must first submit an investigational new drug application to the FDA. And this usually contains some sort of preliminary evidence that it is likely to be safe and effective based on experiments either in cell cultures or even in animals. Then phase 1 begins. Phase 1, so there's 3 phases. In this first one, it's mostly focused on the safety of the vaccine. It usually involves around 20 to 100 participants. These folks receive the vaccine at different doses, and it's to determine if there are certain doses where the side effects get more and more severe. Usually side effects increase with dosage, and so obviously this is done carefully so that no one is seriously harmed. But it is an important part of understanding whether this vaccine is safe. Phase 2 is to assess whether the vaccine maybe actually works. It's usually done with around 50 to 300 participants. And in measuring the efficacy of this vaccine, which we'll get to in a second, they're going to also use different dosages. And because some doses might be more effective than others. If you give somebody twice as much of the vaccine, does it work twice as well? Things like that. And they're going to use that information from that first phase 1 trial to avoid doses that have really severe side effects. But with few people, it's hard to say with absolute certainty if the drug or if the vaccine works. And honestly, most vaccines, most drug candidates get stuck in these phase 2 trials. But if they are promising, then comes phase 3. And this is often done in thousands of individuals. In the COVID-19 phases, it was done in tens of thousands of individuals. And the purpose is to be able to say with real confidence that this vaccine works or it doesn't. Is there efficacy for this vaccine? And with these larger numbers of people, you can also observe more rare side effects that you may have missed perhaps in phases 1 and 2. If all of these phases are passed, then it actually goes into the arms of regular folks. Now, like I said, these phases can take a lot of work to get through. It typically can take years to get through these phases. And this is due to partially administrative slowdowns. There's a lot of paperwork, approval, recruiting volunteers. For the COVID-19 vaccines, obviously people were interested in having this process move as fast as possible while still being safe. And so the FDA basically accelerated all the administrative parts. They said that we will assign as many people as we need to make sure the administrative stuff happens really fast, and we'll let the science take as long as it needs to take. So both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines have been through all 3 of these phases, and I'm going to cover the efficacy and safety data found in phase 3, and this I think best captures the efficacy and safety because it includes the largest number of people. Oh, well, I'm going to pause real quick to send this back to send the host back to someone. Dean, can I make you host?
Yes, you can. All right, got it.
Okay, cool. That'll allow people to get in from the waiting room. Okay, so I'm going to start with the Pfizer vaccine phase 3 trial data in pretty good detail. This was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. It's one of the most prestigious journals in medicine. For example, the first article on CPR was in New England Journal of Medicine, the first colonoscopy, first article describing AIDS. There's been a lot of firsts for this journal. So when they were organizing the phase 3 trial for the Pfizer vaccine, they recruited about 37,700 people. They were all 16 years or older, and they were either healthy or had a stable chronic condition, something like HIV, hepatitis B, or C. Some groups were excluded. There were no children, there were no pregnant women, there were no people who had COVID-19 or were immunocompromised. And then they took this group and they split them into different age ranges, which is what I'm showing here. They recorded a bunch of information about them, their sex, race, weight, pre-existing health conditions, and then they used a computer program to randomly split each age group into 2 different groups. One that would get the placebo in blue, and one that would get the actual vaccine in red. And so there were about 18,850 people in each group. And as you can see on the right, the computer program did a pretty good job at keeping the groups balanced. So for example, there were about 9,600 men in the real vaccine group, and there were 9,400 men in the placebo group. And same with ethnic groups were also pretty evenly distributed. The people who participated were from the US mostly, but also Argentina, Brazil, and South Africa. 49% of the participants were female, 83% were white, 9% were Black, 28% were Hispanic or Latinx, 42% were older than 55 years old. And this is mostly to mimic the demographics of the United States. So then all the folks in the vaccine group got the real vaccine, and all the folks in the placebo group got a fake vaccine that was just salt water. They then waited 21 days and they gave them a second dose. Again, all the folks in the real vaccine group got the real vaccine. All the folks in the placebo group got some salt water injected into their arm. And in the title here, double blind means that neither the participants nor the researchers knew who was getting the real vaccine or the placebo. And randomized means that people were, like I said, randomly assigned to receive either the real vaccine or the placebo, and that was done using a computer program. So there should be no significant difference between those two groups. And controlled just means that there was indeed a placebo group. And these double-blind, randomized controlled trials are really the gold standard for clinical research. So then they waited a week. After a week had passed from giving them the second dose. And for 2 months, starting at that point, they kept in touch with all the people who got the vaccine and the placebo. And they compared how many of those vaccinated folks got COVID-19 and how many of those folks who got the placebo got COVID-19. And these people just, led their life, they were, obviously careful or they were equally careful or careless in each group. And so out of the 18,850 people who got the real vaccine, 8 of those people got COVID-19. Of the 18,850 people who got the placebo, 162 of them got COVID-19. So that's a really big difference. And we can use this information to calculate efficacy. Now, you may have heard people say that COVID-19 vaccines have an efficacy around 95%. And I'll show you exactly how that's calculated. You would expect that if no one had received the vaccine, that both groups would have had around 162 people to get COVID-19, right? Because there's no clear difference between the two groups. They were just randomly assigned. That means that the group that got vaccinated, they avoided 162 minus 8 cases. 154 cases of COVID-19 were avoided. So you then divide 154 by 162, the total number of cases, and we can say that of the people who got the vaccine and were likely exposed to COVID, 95% did not get COVID. And that's what 95% efficacy really means. For context, flu vaccine efficacy is usually around 60% on a good year. So 95% is really quite impressive. And I think most people were surprised by that. And this efficacy was almost identical across ethnicity, sex, age. So the vaccine appears to work equally well for everyone. They also tracked severe cases. They had in the placebo group 9 severe cases, and the vaccine group had just 1 severe case of COVID-19. So that's encouraging. And then I thought this chart was really interesting here on the right. The blue squares show every time that someone with the placebo got COVID-19. And the red squares show every time someone who got the real vaccine got COVID-19. And they've sort of zoomed in here on the lower left part of the chart and made it big in the upper left. And you can see, and so the x-axis starts days after dose number 1. And you can see that right around dose 12, right around day 12, you really start to see a difference between these two groups. And so that's pretty interesting that about 12 days after the first dose, you start to see a significant difference. The adaptive immune system really starts to kick in. And they calculated that with just 1 dose, there's an efficacy of about 52%. So you definitely want to get that second dose, but that first dose is a big help. Okay, so it seems pretty good at preventing COVID-19, but what are the trade-offs, right? Like, we also want to know about safety. Many folks reported pain at the injection site. I'm showing here on the left, folks who were older than 55, and on the right, folks who were younger, 16 to 55. The mild effects are in green, moderate effects are in blue, and severe effects are in orange. In both young and older folks, the pain at injection site was much higher in the real vaccine compared to the placebo. Next most common, and I should say that it was, however, mostly mild or moderate pain, and it disappeared within 1 to 2 days for most people. Next common were fatigue and headache, followed by fever. And I think these are really important symptoms, right? You don't want to get the shot and then not be able to do anything for a week because you have a headache. And so around half of people experienced fatigue, and a little less than that experienced headache. Now, again, they mostly resolved in 1 to 2 days and were mostly mild or moderate. But I think it's worth pointing out here that on the far right here, you can see that of the young folks who got the vaccine, about half of them reported a headache. But even the folks who got the fake vaccine, the placebo, a quarter of them had a headache also. So, you know, if you think about this 52% here, only maybe half of that's actually due to the vaccine. The rest is just due to the stress of knowing that you're going to get a vaccine, the stress of going to the hospital, getting the shot, waiting in line. So it's important, I think, to recognize that the mindset of how you go into things really contributes a lot to how you feel afterwards. Now, they also mentioned that in the course of the trial, 2 vaccine recipients died and 4 placebo recipients died. None of these deaths were considered related to the vaccine or COVID-19. They were things like heart attacks. These were much older folks. And safety monitoring of this whole group will continue for 2 years. As for the Moderna vaccine, its phase 3 clinical trial was very, very similar. It was also published in the New England Journal of Medicine. There were just a few differences that I'll go through. All of the trial participants were in the US. They were all 18 or older instead of 16. It was a slightly smaller trial. I plotted here. You can see Pfizer was around 37,000. Moderna was around 28,000. And what they did is they split groups into a vaccine group that got 14,000 and a placebo group that got of 14,000. And they did the same thing. They followed them for 2 months. Of the 14,000 in the vaccine group, 11 of those got COVID over those 2 months. And of the 14,000 in the placebo group, 185 of those got COVID over those 2 months. And so again, we can subtract those to figure out the number of cases that they avoided and divide by 185, and you get an efficacy of 94%, which is almost identical to the Pfizer vaccine. And this isn't that surprising. Like we saw earlier in this seminar, the ingredients are very similar. You wouldn't expect a big difference. But one interesting thing that I should say is that the dosage of the Moderna vaccine, which I'm showing here, which I'm covering here, is actually 3 times higher than the Pfizer vaccine. And what's weird is it doesn't seem to result in any improvement in efficacy. So it's not clear why that is. Maybe it will result in longer durability, but I would be skeptical of that. So the only differences between the 2 vaccines that I do think are worth mentioning is that the incidence of headache and fever in the Moderna vaccine seemed slightly worse than the Pfizer vaccine. And maybe that is due to this higher dose. So if you had the choice, I would get the Pfizer vaccine over the Moderna vaccine personally, because I think the common side effects that we're all most likely to suffer are going to be slightly less with the Pfizer vaccine. And it's also, I don't know, there's something nice about it just being more efficient. Like you get 1/3 of the dose, but you get the same efficacy. So that, I don't know, that seems good to me. Now, that being said, they are really, really similar, and you should probably just take whatever option you can get, because it's unlikely you'll have a choice. And so personally, I'll take whatever I can get. Now, there are still some questions we don't know. Are these vaccines safe for pregnant people? Are they safe for children? We won't know this for many months. I don't even think phase 3 trials have started in children or pregnant people. But perhaps the question that most people want the answer to is, how long is this vaccine going to give you protection to COVID-19? And to be honest, we really don't know. There was one recent article about a week ago, again in New England Journal of Medicine, And this here showed that about 90 days after the second injection of the Moderna vaccine, the antibodies in those folks were generally higher than those who have had COVID-19. And so that's promising that 90 days later, your antibodies are still really quite high, even higher than people who actually had the disease. Now, the reason it's difficult to estimate is that vaccines have really different durations. Take something like seasonal flu vaccine. Like, that might protect you for 4 months. Then there's the pertussis vaccine, that's whooping cough. That's like 5 years you'll be good for. Tetanus, something like 20 years. And measles, you're good forever. You get one shot, you're good for your whole life. And we know this information, but scientists still don't know why this is the case. Like, this is something that scientists are actively working on and trying to research. And so it's just really hard to say how durable this brand new mRNA vaccine will be until we actually get there. Now, generally looking online, obviously a lot of experts have opinions. It ranges from folks who are kind of skeptical and are saying maybe a year, you'll have a year of good protection, and versus folks who are more optimistic, think 2 to 3 years or even longer. So that's sort of where people are at, where they're thinking, but we really just don't know. Now, if there's one thing you can take away, is that vaccine durability is really not all or nothing. Here, I'm showing on the bottom a number of vaccines, and I'm showing their durability over many years. And you can see that purple here is 100% effectiveness, or 100% effect. It's like it's the effect that you had a day after, or a week after getting that vaccine, compared to yellow, which is as if you never got the vaccine. And you can see for many of these, there's a long period where it's somewhere in between purple and yellow. So it's unlikely that in 1 year, all of our vaccination will have been useless. People may have only half or a fraction of the protection they originally had, but there's likely to still be some benefit.
Thanks for the presentation, Andrew. And George Villa is saying, great presentation. I will invite my buddy next meeting. That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, please invite your friends. We'd love to share this information with more people.
So my goal isn't to scare anyone from getting the vaccine at all, or try to gloss over all of these and tell you it's not a big deal, don't worry about them. I'm just going to let you know what the data shows, and you can make your own decision about what you want to do. I think just knowledge is power, and everybody will make different choices for what their personal history is, talk to their doctor, what their risk of getting the disease is, and go from there. So these are the current COVID-19 numbers. We have 94.2 million positive cases, 51 million people who have recovered, and over 2 million deaths. And it's important, I think, to weigh these numbers against what the adverse events are from getting vaccinated. You have 10 to 15% of the cases of COVID-19 progress to severe disease. 5% become critically ill with a 2% fatality rate. Here are the number of vaccines that have been given. You have 39.7 million doses given worldwide and 13.7 million doses given in the US. So as we vaccinate more people, the chances that some individuals are going to have a severe medical emergency or die within days of the vaccine will happen, and we'll have to determine, was that from the vaccine or was that something that was going to happen anyway? And this will be the largest vaccination effort in history, and there will be a great deal of data that will come out of this whole thing. So I want to talk about reactogenicity and safety profile. Reactogenicity is the physical manifestation of the inflammatory response to vaccination. And this includes injection site pain, redness, swelling, or induration, which is like a hard mass at the injection site. And then you have systemic symptoms such as fever, myalgia, which is muscle soreness, and headache. the safety profile refers to adverse events that could potentially be triggered or caused or worsened at any time after vaccination. That includes anaphylactic reactions and diseases diagnosed after vaccination and autoimmune diseases. So I'm going to talk a little bit about reactogenicity and why do you feel unpleasant after getting a vaccination. These unpleasant feelings can lead to needle fear and negative attitudes, non-compliance from patients, which ends up threatening public health because people don't want to get vaccinated. But these are actually signs that the body is mounting an immune response. They're signs that the vaccine antigens are being recognized by the body as potential pathogens or danger signals. So I was asked to make a metaphor because this is a very complicated pathway for why this happens. And let's say like the antigen is like a giant industry or a corporation that is causing some suffering, destroying the planet, exploiting others, causing animal cruelty, who knows? And so when you're poked, these resident immune cells, these mast cells, monocytes, macrophages, etc. Imagine these are like your frontline investigators or your whistleblowers, and they're activated. And within minutes, they spread pictures and photos and videos, letting everybody else know what's going on with this giant industry. These are like the pro-inflammatory cytokines, chemokines, effectors of complement cascade, vasodilators. And what these do is they recruit these little peaceful, nonviolent protesters to the site. And so they're like holding signs. So this allows like recruitment from the blood of these other mediators. This leads to redness, swelling. It lets everybody know something's wrong. We need to address this issue. And it starts to like raise awareness about what's going on. So hopefully this will lead to neutralizing the threat. But these cytokines, they can go systemically and act on distant organs through several pathways. So this leads to you getting a fever and getting sick. And it's a pain. And some people might not like the effects of these activists. They're like being annoying, they're making you feel bad, but this is important because you're not gonna listen to what your body is telling you otherwise. So you need them to make these effects. So then I'm gonna talk about adverse events like anaphylaxis. This is what happens when the police show up. Anaphylaxis is a whole body response to something that has become an allergen. So within days of the European Union approval and the emergency use authorization, we began hearing reports of anaphylaxis among recipients of the new mRNA vaccines. And these are reactions that happen quickly and cause death. It can cause an itchy rash in the throat, swelling the tongue, shortness of breath, vomiting, lightheadedness, low blood pressure. But these are common things that we usually experience anyway to other allergens that we come into contact in our environment. Worldwide, 0.05 to 2% of the population is estimated to experience anaphylaxis at some point in your life. And there is a 99.7% survival rate in a hospital setting from anaphylaxis. So this is how anaphylaxis happens. So imagine like your corporation is using its power and influence to get the law enforcement on their side. And they tell the SWAT team to come. So the allergen is this corporation. Imagine these little IgG people are the police. They're getting the SWAT team to come. They're all like going and getting on board of this big police SWAT vehicle. And they end up like freaking out. And so the corporation has told them, you know what, these nonviolent protesters, they are terrorists and we have to do something about this. So they don't act in a way that would be helpful. Instead, they end up releasing these vasoactive amines, histamines, all over, and it affects the rest of the normal body. So the whole system is destroyed. but you need intervention, something like epinephrine, oxygen, to help get the body back into functioning state. I don't know what, this is where my metaphor kind of breaks down. I don't know what you'd want to call like epinephrine or oxygen. You can like add your ideas in the chat. Maybe it's nonviolent direct action. I don't know. So basically this anaphylactic response is mediated by these IgE antibodies that are produced by the immune system in response to this antigen. And these lead to the mast cells and the basophils, which contain these histamine granules that are released, and that's what causes severe reaction and inflammation. So in the Pfizer-BNT vaccination, they reported their figures from December 14th to the 23rd. We had 1.9 million doses given, an adverse event rate of 0.2%. Now I've heard it's up to 29 cases and 9 doses given. 90% of those who had this anaphylaxis event were female, which is interesting. And it's a total of 1 in 90,000, which is about 10 times higher than we would see from a normal vaccine or from our usual vaccines. 71% of these reactions occurred within 15 minutes of vaccination. So that's why they're having people wait 30 minutes before leaving so that we can monitor folks for these events and they can get treatment. Nobody died from these anaphylaxis events that I'm aware of. And this is just a chart of when these events happened. And it all shows that 81% of the patients actually had a documented history of allergies or allergic reactions. So if you have a history of allergies or allergic reactions, you are at increased risk for this. And 33% of the patients had experienced an episode of anaphylaxis in the past. And we think that the cause is likely this polyethylene glycol, which Andrew talked about, so I won't go into more detail about that. But it's very rare, this allergy, but sometimes implicated in patients who have had reactions to multiple medications. Polyethylene glycol is widely used in oral and injectable medications. And then, of course, treatment is epinephrine, which acts on alpha-1 receptors, causes smooth muscle contraction, raises blood pressure, and increases heart rate. And then there's debate on whether these people should receive a booster. I sure wouldn't if I had this, but I think everybody should make their own choice. Talk to your doctor. Maybe some people might be able to pre-medicate beforehand. Because this is so well studied, all of these adverse events are reported to the vaccination adverse event reporting system. Nurses, patients, doctors, everybody involved can report these events. The CDC also has this VSafe program. It's a smartphone-based program, and you sign up when you're vaccinated on your smartphone. They will, I guess, periodically like send you notifications asking how you're feeling, and then you can report back. There's also, if you do have a vaccine injury, there's this vaccine injury compensation program. This was made to kind of protect the pharmaceutical companies so that they would want to create vaccinations, because if they knew that they were going to be sued for every adverse event, they likely wouldn't want to invest the funds in that. So that is why this compensation program was created. Bell's palsy is another thing that was discovered in some of the vaccine trials. And this is a facial paralysis that is unexplained, and it causes facial muscle weakness and paralysis. It begins suddenly and then worsens over 48 hours. The vaccinated participants experience the paralysis between 22 and 32 days following inoculation. There was 3 in the Moderna vaccination group, 1 in the placebo placebo group, and then 4 in the Pfizer vaccine group. But actually the normal annual incidence of Bell's palsy is 15 to 30 per 100,000 people. So what we're seeing in the vaccine group of both of these groups actually might be normal background rates of Bell's palsy, but they're going to monitor this and do some more follow-up and see after these millions of vaccines given whether the rates are higher than regular background rates. And there has been a death after vaccination from the Pfizer-BNT vaccine. Dr. Michael Gregory was 56-year-old obstetrician and gynecologist. He received the vaccine on December 18th and died 16 days later from a brain hemorrhage. He had acute immune-mediated thrombocytopenia, which occurs when the immune system attacks a patient's own platelets or attacks the cells in the bone marrow that makes platelets. And actually, COVID-19 itself can cause this condition in some patients. It's interesting that the measles vaccine and measles itself have been known to cause the same clotting problem, but it's usually transient and not serious. And it occurs in about 1 out of every 25,000 measles shots. And I see in the chat, somebody said, Bell's palsy is temporary. Yeah, that's exactly true. I'm sorry, I didn't mention that. It usually actually lasts, I think, about 12 weeks. And most people are fully recovered by 6 months, but everybody's fully recovered by 6 months usually. There are a few people who is permanent. Most people are recovered by 3 months, actually. So we don't know actually whether this guy's death was caused by the vaccine. His platelets were very low a few days after the vaccination, and there's thought that maybe his platelets must have already been dropping before he even received the vaccine. But who knows? It's a tragedy for sure, and there'll be ongoing investigations. You might also find out about this these 23 deaths in Norway that people are talking about. In Norway, they're now vaccinating the elderly and people in nursing homes with serious underlying diseases. So it's expected that deaths close to the time of vaccination may occur. Of the 19 cases of severe side effects I'm gonna go on here. So there were 23 deaths. About 400 people die each week in nursing homes. So we're trying to figure out, are these deaths due to the vaccine? But Norway is believing it is so they're kind of changing their vaccine guidelines and not maybe vaccinating people over the age of 80 who have a whole lot of other conditions that make them make them very frail. So they have updated their guidelines because of that, and they will be watching it even more. In France, one frail patient died in a care home 2 hours after receiving the vaccination, which is kind of freaky. They think that that person was going to die anyway, but I don't know why you would vaccinate somebody who was that close to death. That's kind of scary. And then Andrew already went over these, but wanted to talk about deaths during the trials. More people died in the placebo group than the vaccine group in both of these trials. So thank you very much. I'm going to throw it to Dean right now.
Woohoo! Thank you, Crystal. Awesome presentation.
Thank you.
I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, good. So thanks everyone for being with us. I'm going to finish now with a quick presentation on some political and economic issues to put some context behind this whole science. We'll start with some quick news and dive a little deeper into a selected topic. So here's some COVID news. That's a terrible thing to say, but I hope you're excited for some COVID news.
I'm
The
excited.
San Francisco Chronicle reports that California has 2 million unused doses of the vaccines. This reflects broader sluggishness as the United States has struggled to distribute vaccines effectively. Reasons include scaling to meet California's large population, chaotic federal guidance and logistical planning, and lags in data reporting. CBS News reports that a COVID-19 variant first found in the UK could be the dominant strain in the US by March. The new strain is about 50% more infectious than the original, and the CDC estimates that the new strain will constitute the majority of COVID cases in the next 2 months. In relation to vaccines, research suggests that the Pfizer vaccine is effective in inoculating against the new coronavirus strain. Crystal, Andrew, feel free to drop some details in the chat if you like. And finally, Vox and other sources are reporting that the Biden transition is proposing a $400 billion proposal to tackle COVID-19. And this takes us into what we'll be diving deeper into today. That is Biden and what to expect with coronavirus in 2021. So the so-called American Rescue Plan is a $1.9 trillion proposal that Biden hopes to get through Congress. It includes support for communities and businesses at $400 billion, direct relief to individuals and families at $1 trillion, which I believe includes a proposal for a $15 federal minimum wage, which is awesome. And the last topic, which is what we're covering today, it is the actual $400 billion coronavirus response. The proposed coronavirus response package would significantly ramp up testing, tracing, treatment, and vaccination around the United States. This is a photo of the Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles being used as a COVID testing site. Cities and states have been begging for more federal support around the country, and to many, the Biden proposal is a welcomed response. The plan is ambitious and includes goals to administer 100 million vaccine doses in Biden's first 100 days, and they want to hire 100,000 medical workers to assist with COVID response. So to see how this is an improvement, we're going to briefly talk about how this compares to what happened under Trump. So I really don't like talking about Donald Trump, so I tried to create a little more pleasant aesthetic. Please enjoy this photo of the beach. The main difference between Biden's and Trump's plan is that basically Biden's plan actually exists. The Trump administration projected 20 million people would be vaccinated by the end of December last year. And as of last week, the US has only vaccinated under 5 million people. So much of this is an intentional minimal role of the federal government under the Trump administration. Trump explicitly stated that his federal response would take part in coronavirus only as a quote unquote supplier of last resort. And while this included federal purchasing of coronavirus vaccines, this led to a haphazard series of responses by a patchwork of states, cities, and private healthcare providers trying to figure out on their own how to do the work of testing, tracing, and supporting communities through the coronavirus. This approach has been panned by experts. Ajishka Jha, a public health professor at Brown University, tweeted in December, "Did we not know that vaccines were coming? Is vaccine administration a surprise? It takes a lot of time to prepare to actually administer something as large as millions of doses. It would be nice to have prepared for it in advance. We didn't do that, but overall, the Biden coronavirus plan is expected to fill gaping holes left by the Trump administration." So hopefully some good stuff is coming. How does this change things on the ground in California? First thing to note is that it's going to take some time. Among other things, we're going to have to wait for congressional approval as well as an implementation timeline. Funds need to get approved, distributed, regulations need to be understood, and while Democrats control the presidency and Congress, Republicans and moderate Democrats may stall efforts to actually approve spending to roll out vaccines. This can further compound delays that it takes to actually get to work on implementing any proposal that's passed. So in Biden's words, the honest truth is things will get worse before they get better, and the policy changes we are going to be making are going to take time to show up in the COVID statistics. This compounds issues of slow rollouts that have already been happening. Recall that we've been slow to distribute a lot of the vaccines that we've had, with over 2 million doses just sitting in storage. A lot of this is due to people just waiting to receive their vaccines who have already been scheduled. Recall that you need 2 doses to have an effective vaccination. So a lot of people are having these doses sitting in storage to make sure that they're available when it actually comes time to take their second dose. So that's part of it. And a lot of it is just logistical failures that I've already mentioned. However, we should note that the federal government is not the only source of a fractured response. By and large, we have a mix of public and private healthcare providers. And you may have seen this if you've tried to schedule your own coronavirus tests in Berkeley. You may have been directed by the city website to schedule a test from one of several, often private medical providers that often have different requirements for registration, to create your own accounts, etc. This patchwork system is common throughout the United States, including California, and has contributed to complications, including distributing coronavirus vaccines. And this has created problems with a lack of standardized reporting requirements and sometimes selective reporting, as distributors often report their vaccines at different times and in different ways. So overall, it is super complicated. And regarding the vaccine complications, Santa Clara County Supervisor Jim Sidian said, "Is it any wonder, given the Rube Goldberg contraption that has been designed for vaccine delivery, that people are confused and uncertain about where the next doses come from? To call it convoluted is an understatement." The good news is, that said, despite the slow rollout, millions of Americans have already begun to receive the vaccines and are charting the path to recovery. This may include some of you, and our very own Crystal, I believe, is scheduled to receive her first coronavirus vaccine in the coming week. Sorry if that is a HIPAA violation, but that's some good news to share.
I'll back and let you all know how I feel and which one I ended up getting. I don't know if anybody else, has anybody gotten the vaccine or tried to, or know any reports? Please post in the chat.
My parents are getting it soon. They got scheduled to get it.
Oh, cool. Wow. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, they're over
Good.
65, so.
Julie, do you have any idea what the Kaiser process is for that? Because I made the huge mistake of going through Kaiser instead of my health department. I guess health department is the way to go. And
I know my parents, once they got a notification that they were eligible to get it, they called and waited on hold for an hour on the phone. And then when they finally got to a person, they scheduled an appointment, and then there were 5,800 calls in the queue.
oh my gosh.
Oh boy,
So-
all right.
I can weigh in on that. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll take one more comment from Raymond.
Okay, Kaiser, don't call the phone number. Go online and you can schedule a vaccination. I scheduled the vaccination. My wife scheduled the vaccination. You have to be older than 65. The Kaiser procedure is kind of complex, but be patient with it. You can schedule a vaccination. The Sutter Health System is also offering vaccinations for people, I think it's 55 and older. So the vaccine is becoming available here in the East Bay if you're of a certain age.
Well, and you're in the phase 1A healthcare worker or whatever too. Like me, I'm not 55, but I can get it because of my job. But yeah, I called, I went online because they have a COVID vaccine website, and that didn't say anything about how to sign up. I then called, they had a special hotline. That gave no information on how to get a vaccine. And then I ended up calling the help nurse, bypassing the number that it told me to call because I already did that, and then asked the help nurse. And then she's like, "I'll email your doctor." And I'm like, well, I could have emailed my doctor. I got a message from my doctor saying that they'll reach out to me this week to schedule it. They never did. And then meanwhile, my colleagues are all getting it, and they're like, just go through the health department. So that's where I am at right now.
Well, that's the theme of our presentation today. It's a complicated process. Crystal, thanks for sharing. I'm going to conclude here. So that goes to show, expect some early challenges in 2021 with implementing, but hopefully we can expect a stronger, more unified coronavirus response. As an open final thought, we may wonder how much of the vaccine snafus are from Trump and how much of it reflects our healthcare system in America as a whole. So this year, under a new Biden administration, we may begin to find out. So that's it. Maybe we can open up to discussion and questions. Thanks everyone for being here.
Yeah, please. There wasn't a whole lot of questions in the chat. Like last time there really work hard to get through those questions, but.
I answered a few of them, but thanks, Dean. That was great.
Is it worthwhile for low risk groups to get the vaccine now? Well, I mean, you'll end up getting it when you come, like when it reaches your phase of the rollout. So I think when it becomes available to you, you should get it, because we're still aiming for herd immunity. So, and while you still might be able to transmit it, it'll be a lot less. You will be protected. Any other thoughts on that from anybody else?
Yeah, I agree. I think the current rollout of getting it to older folks and more at-risk folks makes sense. So folks who are at low risk, like myself, I don't think we need to get it. I don't think we should get it now, because it would be taking it away from people who need it more. But when it's available, we should get it.
Yeah, and Margaret asked, go through your health department. What health department? It's like, for me, it's my county health department. Google like Alameda County Health Department, from what I understand. I have not been successful in this yet, so I don't know if this is, but this is what people who have gotten the vaccine have told me. Go through your county health department, call or email them, and they will hook you up, supposedly.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm going to say it correctly. I looked at the Marin numbers yesterday, and it looks like, 70% in their 80s, 70% dying from it are 80s. Then the next group is 65 to 80. And you know what Norway was doing?
Mm-hmm.
Is if it looks like the people with priority are the elders, in assisted living, comorbidities, and frontline workers. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so if you look at actuarials, like at the beginning of this decade, you see that this decade is the bell curve for the people in their 80s. So there's going to be a huge number of people dying. So if we give this vaccine to, all the elder people that are going to die anyway, you said, well, there's this process they have to go through now to weed out the people that are going to die anyway versus the people that are getting the vaccine. Maybe the Norwegians are doing the right thing. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see the data that comes out over the next few weeks. As far as I'm just scared for the older folks who if it may hasten their death, like that's just awful. But it sounds like all of these people who did die were very, very sick in these nursing homes.
It's when people die is in their 80s. So it's like, and they really hide the numbers for just the people that are going to die anyways. In other words, the death by age and demographic, they hid those numbers way back at the start of this thing because they didn't want us to say, well, people are going to die anyways. They want us to face the reality of being exposed to a pandemic. But at the same time,
thank you, Judy. I would be careful about the language of would die. I think everyone, there are different timelines for everybody, and I think we shouldn't,
we
write
do
anyone off.
Die,
so.
Like in our 80s, 80 to 90, because I just took 2 people to end of life. And I mean, is that triggering for people to know that other people die?
I think we should be careful about the way we mention it. I mean, there are averages about life expectancy, but everyone's different. Andrew, want to chime in?
Okay.
I was going to say there are a lot of healthy 80-year-olds, including some people in the call, so who I value, and I think it's something to think about.
But
yeah, we probably have like 200 members of Congress who are in their 80s.
Sure.
So,
Biden now?
Like, he's in his 70s. I'm not sure where in his 70s, but I mean, there are definitely like 80 something year olds who are definitely kind of on their way out, and they're ones who definitely have a few good years left.
Yeah,
so
60. I like it, Alex. And there might be an 80-year-old who has 20, 30 more years left. And that's
are there any numbers on vegans dying? Or I don't mean to use the word dying. I'm sorry. Are there any numbers on vegans? or people that are especially healthy with no comorbidities.
That would be a good thing for us to research to see how the extremely healthy folks are doing. That would be curious.
Yeah, Judy, I think you raise an interesting point, and I think it's true that some groups are at much higher risk than others. But I guess the idea is that because we're all in this together, like things spread so easily that by vaccinating everybody, it will prevent a lot of those deaths, even especially in groups that are more at high risk.
Yeah, I think the issue is with like, even if you have some 80-something-year-olds with like cancer and dementia who are on their way out, like you still don't want them contracting it and giving it to the healthier 80-something-year-olds. So that's why you just vaccinate everybody in that population.
So maybe we could finish with some diverse perspectives. Maybe, I think, Raymond, if you want to chime in, I know that you're one of our coordinators. Okay.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
All right, cool. I think we might want to change topic a little bit. Thanks, Judy. It's a valid point to bring up. I think I'd like to consider some other perspectives too.
Yeah, I'd just like to say too, like the nursing homes were kind of super spreader places. And if we protect those people, we will likely protect everybody too. And all of the people who have to work in those facilities who may be younger. So I think protecting the weakest among us is always the best way to go. Usually a good philosophy for life. Any other questions? Or should we call it a day? Yeah, Raul works with senior citizens. Protect everyone.
I posted in the chat. I feel like you all did an amazing job with the science questions. At least for myself, I feel like pretty good about it. Not that I feel like I can explain it to other people, but that I'm like, okay, this looks pretty safe, looks pretty good, which I did not feel like even yesterday. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
There's definitely, we've seen like Trumpers or like right-wing folks that are very anti-mask, anti-vaccine, but I've also seen some very left-wing friends of mine that I love dearly that are like, no, if you eat a lot of fruit and are filled with love, you can't get sick. And I'm just like, no, I don't think you know how this works. But I'm curious, because this is sort of like promoted as a rounded thing. Like if we're going to discuss like, how can we engage in useful dialogue with people, or like what could be done politically? Because I think what a lot of people are doing are kind of like shaming and being angry at people, which I don't think is necessarily the most helpful. So I'm really curious about that aspect of it. And then there's the other like thing which I've mentioned earlier around like political reasons that people don't trust the government or trust our health institutions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good point. It's so hard to talk about. I think talking to people one-on-one is usually the best way. Over the internet is when things sort of deteriorate. When you're talking over text and over social media, then everybody has their individual camps. But if you're talking to somebody one-on-one, they know you're a real person, and asking people questions about what their fears are and where they're coming from is the most important thing to do. And then talking about the science behind them once you've addressed their fears. Maybe I can talk a little bit more about like how doctors approach talking to people who may be reluctant to make the right choices, and how you ultimately have to let them make the choice. You can't force people to do anything, although there are systems in place too that we need to change, like that are causing violence and suffering. But does anybody else have any ideas on how to talk to people?
I thought, Cristobal, you brought up a really good point. And it's funny because, you know, on this one, I think there's a lot of common ground, like both people who want to get the vaccine and people who don't want to get the vaccine, both want to have the best health for themselves and their community. And I think building on that common ground is really important. Now, things break down if they do not trust science or evidence or the government, then that can really break things down. And I think that's something we could explore in a future Sunday. I like that.
Yeah, it's a big question. I worry that I'm a little pessimistic on that is because it's very intertwined with political alignments, which we've seen high degrees of polarization nowadays, to say the least. But you know, it's definitely worth asking.
I like the idea. I've seen, I mean, this is not a conversational thing, but I've seen lots of people posting a video of them getting the vaccine or photos of them while they're getting the vaccine. It just like helps take some of the scariness out of it. Like, oh, they're getting it and that guy's getting it and all these people I know are getting it. And I literally saw them get it and they're not now dead or developed a new psychological disorder or whatever. Like, you know, it just helps prove the safety, I guess, and like normalizes it again, which it should be normalized, but
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Well, I guess a little optimistic note, Crystal's mentioning this is a teach-in, and more teach-ins for more communities can be helpful. And yeah, when people come together like this and see each other face to face, virtually face to face, and show that there are real human beings right in front of each other who care about each other, who feel things and think the world in different ways, that shows that keeps us accountable to just being good people for each other and then for our communities. So thanks everyone for being here, because this being here is part of how we educate ourselves and then help each other build a healthier, happier world.
Yeah. And I hope you all can come next week. We will be discussing in week 3. Well, maybe we should change it up. Maybe we'll be talking more about how to talk to people. Who knows?
Yeah.
But we were planning on talking about individual and collective strategies for dealing with COVID-19. What will change once the vaccination begins on a large scale. We'll explain the new vaccine coming out, the adenovirus vaccine, and more about One Health. So I hope you can all join us next week at 11 a.m. Until then, please leave your email in the chat so we can connect with you. And you can also ask us any questions. You could always, I'll just put my email in the chat if you want to ask us or me more questions over email. Please do. And you can always contact us on Facebook via the Facebook event page. And we will save this chat. I'm glad you think it's helpful. Yeah. Any final words from anybody else? Andrew left his number and name.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end. And come back everybody next week. You'll hear about Crystal's experience getting the vaccine.
Yes.
And any side effects she's suffering.
Yay.
Cool. Bye, everybody. See you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye all.